Blood tastes like rusted copper. That was the last thing I learned before the cold finally took me. Tristan stood over me, his tailored cashmere coat pristine, watching me gasp on the frozen cabin floor. Then I woke up, not in the snow, but suffocating in a tight, silk dress, holding a sweating glass of champagne. It was the night of my engagement party. Tristan was smiling at me, but this time my eyes found the solitary, terrifying man in the corner. His uncle. Air tore into my lungs with the violence of shattered glass. I choked, doubling over the champagne, flute slipping from my numb fingers. It hit the marble floor. The sharp crack of crystal didn't register over the roaring in my ears. I was supposed to be dead. My fingers should have been black with frostbite, my lips cracked and bleeding, my heart a frozen, useless stone in my chest. Instead, a warm hand settled on my bare shoulder. Hazel, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. The voice smooth, practiced, dripping with fake concern. I flinched so hard my elbow struck his ribs. Tristan, he was wearing the charcoal suit, the one he bought for this exact night, our engagement gala. I stared at his impeccably shaved jaw, the faint scent of bergamot and expensive gin wafting off him. My stomach pitched, while rose in the back of my throat hot and acidic. I jerked away from his touch, stumbling backward until my spine hit the cool plaster of a decorative pillar. Don't, I rasped. My voice sounded foreign, too young, unbroken. Tristan frowned, an irritated twitch tightening the corner of his mouth. He hated public scenes. Hazel, people are staring. Have you had too much to drink? He reached for me again. I slapped his hand away. The smack echoed louder than the string quartet playing in the background. A few guests turned. I didn't care. The phantom sensation of ice crystallizing in my veins was overwhelming. I looked around the room. The golden chandeliers, the ridiculous towers of macarons, the sea of smiling, deceitful faces. Over by the velvet drapes stood Sophie, my maid of honor, Tristan's mistress. She was looking at us, biting her bottom lip, playing the innocent bystander while wearing the diamond tennis bracelet Tristan had bought her with my family's money. I squeezed my eyes shut. This wasn't purgatory. This was 3 years ago. I need air, I muttered, pushing past him. I didn't wait for his reply. I practically ran toward the terrace doors, my high heels catching dangerously on the hem of my dress. The night air was humid, heavy with the scent of impending rain and blooming jasmine. It wasn't freezing. It wasn't the cabin. I collapsed against the stone balustrade, gripping it until my knuckles turned stark white. I dragged the humid air into my lungs, sobbing a dry, ugly sound. I am alive. I am 23. We aren't married yet. I didn't want justice. Justice is a sterile, empty word used by people who haven't felt their internal organs shut down one by one while the man they loved watched. I wanted ruin. I wanted to tear him apart down to the studs. A heavy clink of ice against glass snapped me out of my spiral. I wasn't alone, sitting in the shadows of the terrace corner, mostly obscured by a sprawling potted fern, was a man. He didn't move to hide himself. He just watched me. Conrad, Tristan's uncle, the black sheep of the family, not because he was a failure, but because he was a predator in a family of scavengers. He had built an empire independent of his father's old money, crushing competitors with a ruthless, almost bored efficiency. People whispered about him. They said he lacked the part of the brain that felt pity. He took a slow sip of his amber liquor. His eyes, a shade of gray, so dark they looked like wet slate, locked onto mine. He wore a simple black suit, no tie, collar undone. He looked out of place among the peacocks inside. Usually, Conrad said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in the humid air. Brides-to-be cry after the vows. I swiped a trembling hand under my eyes, smudging expensive mascara. I didn't try to play it off. I didn't giggle or blame the champagne. I just looked at him, really looked at him. He was the only person Tristan genuinely feared. Tristan spent his whole life trying to emulate Conrad's wealth, but cowered like a whipped dog whenever the man entered a room. An insane, desperate idea took root in the mud of my traumatized brain. "I'm not going to be a bride," I said. My mic shook, but the words were solid. Conrad raised a dark eyebrow. The ice in his glass shifted. "Really? And does my nephew know this?" "Not yet." I took a step toward him. My legs felt like wet sand, but I forced them to move. "But you know he's a liability. You've known it for years." Conrad went perfectly still. The casual, detached observer vanished, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. He set his glass down on the wrought iron table. It made a dull thud. "You are intoxicated. Hazel, go back inside. He's embezzling from the European accounts." I blurted out. The words tumbled out in a messy rush. "He's been doing it for 6 months, using dummy corporations registered in Cyprus. He's masking it as logistical expenses. In my past life, I discovered the fraud a year into our marriage, when I threatened to tell Conrad. Tristan took me to the cabin. Conrad didn't blink. He didn't gasp. He simply leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. The smell of dry cedar and black ink drifted from him. "That is a very severe accusation to make against the man you are supposedly in love with." "I don't love him." I crossed my arms, shivering despite the heat. "I want him destroyed, and you want your company clean. We have a mutual interest. You want me to ruin my own nephew based on the hysterical ramblings of a fiancé who clearly just had a lover's spat. I want you to marry me." The silence that followed was so absolute. I could hear the faint hum of a mosquito near my ear. I was sweating. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. I had overplayed my hand. I was a crazy woman shouting nonsense on a balcony. Conrad stared at me for what felt like an hour. His gaze dropped to my hands. I realized I was digging my nails into my own arms so hard I was drawing blood. He stood up. He was terrifyingly tall, blocking out the light from the ballroom. He pulled a crisp white handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it into my bleeding hand. His fingers brushed mine. They were rough, calloused, grounding. "My office. Tomorrow at 9:00, he said quietly. "Bring proof, or I'll have you committed." He walked past me back into the light. I looked down at the linen in my hand. A spot of bright, red blood bloomed against the white fabric. I squeezed it tight. Morning broke with a miserable gray rain. It washed the city in dull tones, matching the exhaustion deep in my bones. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the suffocating weight of the snowdrifts against the cabin door. By 8:45 a.m., I was standing in the lobby of Vanguard Holdings. My clothes felt wrong. I had put on a sharp navy pantsuit trying to project armor, but my body felt hollowed out. I clutched a leather folder to my chest like a shield. Inside were the bank statements. I had spent the agonizing hours between 3:00 a.m. and dawn digging up from Tristan's unlocked laptop. He was so arrogant. He used the same password, Sophie's birthday, for everything. The elevator ride to the top floor made my stomach drop. Conrad's assistant, a severe-looking woman with graying hair, didn't even ask my name. "He is expecting you. Go right in." The heavy oak door swung open with a heavy oiled silence. Conrad's office was massive, but it didn't feel ostentatious. It felt like a bunker. Dark, wood floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the rain-slicked city. Leather chairs that smelled rich and old. Conrad was seated behind his desk, reviewing a document. He didn't look up right away. The smell of bitter black espresso hung heavy in the air. "Sit," he commanded, flipping a page. I sat in the stiff leather chair opposite him. My knees knocked together. I pressed them hard against each other to stop the shaking. I opened my folder and slid the stack of papers across the polished wood. He finally looked up. In the harsh daylight, the lines around his eyes were more pronounced. He looked tired, but the dangerous edge from last night was still there. He picked up the papers. The only sound in the room was the heavy rain hitting the glass and the dry rustle of paper as he flipped through Tristan's financial death warrant. I watched his face. I expected rage. I expected a vein to bulge in his forehead. Instead, his expression remained entirely flat. It was worse than anger. It was total, calculated, absolute zero. Cyprus, Conrad murmured, dropping the papers back onto the desk. He is even stupider than I calculated. It's all there, I said. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat, hating myself for sounding weak. The transfers, the dates, the shell company ownership. It traces right back to him. Conrad leaned back, stippling his fingers. You broke into his private computer. Yes. Why? I told you last night. I want him ruined. Revenge is a sloppy motive. Hazel, it makes people careless. He tilted his head. 3 days ago, you were picking out floral arrangements with his mother. You looked at him like he hung the moon. Now you sit in my office looking like a feral cat backed into a corner, handing me a loaded gun. What did he do? He killed me. He let me freeze while he went to a hotel with Sophie. He laughed while I banged on the glass. The memory hit me with physical force. My vision tunneled. The smell of espresso faded, replaced by the scent of wet ash and stale air. I grabbed the arms of the chair, gasping. Hazel! The sharp bark of my name snapped me back. Conrad was standing now, leaning over the desk. He wasn't looking at me with pity. He was looking at me like a puzzle with missing pieces. He betrayed me. I forced out, staring at the grain of the desk. He's been with Sophie, my maid of honor. But the cheating isn't the point. The point is he thinks I'm a fool. He thinks my family's money is his safety net for when you finally kick him out of Vanguard. I won't let him have it. Conrad slowly sat back down. And the marriage proposal, a childish attempt to humiliate him, a calculated attempt to protect myself. I countered, looking him in the eye. My hands were finally steady. If I just leave him, he'll spin the narrative. My family is conservative. They'll blame me. He'll play the victim and walk away with half my dignity. If I marry you, he becomes a joke. He loses access to Vanguard. He loses the succession. He boasts to me at every family dinner. You want my name as a shield, and you get my shares in Vanguard. I said, my grandfather had left me a 5% stake in the holding company, a stake Tristan desperately needed to secure a board seat, and a wife who won't ask you for love, attention, or your time, a purely transactional arrangement. Conrad picked up his espresso cup. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving mine. You are offering me 5% of Vanguard and the excuse to legally excise a tumor from my family tree. Yes. He set the cup down. We announce it at the Sunday family dinner. Do not break the engagement before then. Let him walk into the room, thinking he owns it. Relief crashed through me, so violently I felt dizzy. You agree. On one condition, Conrad said softly. He pulled a heavy silver fountain pen from his drawer. You don't flinch when the fire starts. You stand in it. If you back down, I will drop you. I'm already burned, I said quietly. He stared at me a moment longer, then tossed the pen onto the desk. We have a deal. Hazel, now go home and play the loving fiancé. Sunday dinner at the ancestral estate was a tradition steeped in hypocrisy. The dining room was suffocatingly opulent. Heavy velvet curtains trapped the smell of roasted lamb, heavily spiced soup, and the cloying perfume worn by Tristan's mother, Beatrice. I sat at Tristan's right side. The silver spoon felt heavy in my hand. I stared down at the porcelain bowl of consommé, watching a single droplet of fat floating on the surface. Hazel, darling, you've hardly touched your food. Beatrice cooed from across the table. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, wedding jitters. Tristan tells me you were quite dramatic on the balcony the other night. Tristan chuckled a low, patronizing sound. He reached under the table and squeezed my thigh. The contact felt like a burn blister. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from driving my fork into his hand. She's just overwhelmed. Mother, Tristan said smoothly. Choosing the linens has been very stressful for her. He smiled at me, the same smile he wore at the cabin door. I set my spoon down. The clink against the porcelain was unusually loud in the quiet room. Conrad sat at the head of the table. He hadn't spoken since dinner began. He was slowly cutting his meat, watching the room with the detached interest of a biologist observing insects. He didn't look at me, but I knew he was waiting. Don't flinch. I'm not overwhelmed by the linens, I said. My voice cut through the soft murmur of the dining room. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a strange, hollow echo. The table went quiet. Tristan's hand tightened on my leg. Hazel, not now. I'm overwhelmed by the logistics, I continued, turning my head to look directly at Tristan. It's very difficult to plan a honeymoon when the groom's accounts have been flagged for international wire fraud. The silence was absolute. Beatrice paused with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. Tristan's hand dropped from my leg. His face lost its color, a sickening pale gray washing over his features. What kind of joke is this? He hissed, keeping his voice low. It's not a joke, I said, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached into my bag resting on the floor and pulled out a thick envelope. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It slid past the silver candelabra and stopped near Beatrice's plate. Cyprus, 3 million over 6 months, mostly spent on jewelry and hotel suites for Sophie. You crazy bitch. Tristan breathed out, the mask slipping completely. He half stood his chair, scraping violently against the hardwood floor. His hands balled into fists. You dug into my private property. You think you can make up lies. They aren't lies. Conrad's voice dropped into the room like an anvil. Everyone froze. Tristan swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the head of the table. Uncle Conrad, she's hysterical. I don't know what she thinks she saw. I saw them, Conrad said evenly. He set his knife down. I ran the audit myself. Effective tomorrow morning. You are stripped of your title at Vanguard. Your accounts are frozen. You will vacate your office by noon. Beatrice gasped, clutching her pearls. Conrad, you can't do this. He's your nephew. Over a silly misunderstanding with a girl. It is not a misunderstanding. Beatrice, it is theft. Conrad wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. And she is no longer just a girl. Tristan looked wildly between me and Conrad. The panic in his eyes was a balm to my raw nerves. This was what I wanted. To see him small. To see him terrified. The wedding is off, I said, standing up. I pulled the 2-carat diamond ring from my finger. It had felt like a shackle for 3 days. I dropped it into my half-empty soup bowl. It sank with a dull plop. You can't do this, Tristan yelled, stepping toward me. You think you can just embarrass me in front of my family and walk away. You're nothing without me. He reached for my arm. I braced myself to fight him off, but before his fingers could graze my skin, a shadow moved. Conrad was suddenly there. He moved with frightening speed for a man his size. He grabbed Tristan's wrist midair. The grip was brutal. Tristan yelped, his knees buckling slightly under the pressure. Do not touch her, Conrad said. His voice wasn't raised, but it vibrated with a dark, lethal promise. Uncle, let go. She's my fiancée. Tristan choked out, his face contorting in pain. She is my wife. The room seemed to lose all its oxygen. Beatrice let out a strangled cry. Tristan stopped struggling, his eyes widening in horror as he stared at the towering man crushing his wrist. Excuse me, Tristan whispered. Conrad shoved Tristan's arm back, discarding him like garbage. He stepped to my side, his heavy, solid presence anchoring me to the floor. We signed the registry an hour before dinner. Conrad lied smoothly, his dark eyes sweeping the room. Hazel transferred her shares to my name. Vanguard is secure. And as for you, Tristan, Conrad looked down at his nephew, his lip curling in disgust. The next time you see my wife, you will lower your head. Suitcases dropped onto the slate floor with a heavy, dead sound. Conrad's penthouse didn't feel like a home. It felt like a high-altitude observation deck designed by someone who hated clutter and company in equal measure. The air smelled of ozone-filtered vents and the faint, bitter trace of his signature espresso. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the living space, offering a vertigo-inducing view of the city's glittering grid. Rain slashed diagonally against the thick glass, entirely muted. I stood by my luggage shivering. I was wearing a thick wool sweater, but the chill wasn't coming from the room. It was seeping out of my own marrow. Ever since the dinner, the adrenaline had drained from my system, leaving behind the phantom, frostbite. My fingernails looked bluish in the stark overhead lighting. Conrad walked past me, shedding his suit jacket and tossing it over the back of a charcoal sofa. He moved differently in his own space. The calculated stillness was gone, replaced by a restless, predatory grace. "The East Wing is yours," he said, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. His forearms were thick, roped with veins and dusted with dark hair. "Bedroom, private bath, study. I sleep in the West Wing. We share the kitchen and the living areas. My housekeeper comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. I prefer silence in the mornings." "Understood," I managed to say. My teeth clicked together as a shiver violently racked my frame. Conrad stopped. He turned around, his dark slate eyes narrowing as they swept over me. He took in my hunched shoulders, my white-knuckled grip on the handle of my suitcase, and the slight tremor in my jaw. "Are you ill?" he asked, not with worry, but with the irritation of a man who had just acquired a defective asset. "No, I'm just tired." He didn't believe me. He walked over to a sleek black panel on the wall. A digital readout glowed an icy blue. 68 degrees Fahrenheit. He tapped the screen. The numbers climbed. 72 degrees Fahrenheit. 75 degrees Fahrenheit. 78 degrees Fahrenheit. "You're shaking," he stated flatly, "and you have been since we left the estate. It's just a reaction to the stress." I lied, looking away. I couldn't tell him that I was trapped in a sensory loop of dying in a snowbound cabin. "I'll be fine once I lie down." I grabbed the handle of my heaviest suitcase and dragged it toward the hallway he had pointed out. The wheels scraped loudly against the slate. The guest suite, my new room, was spacious, dominated by a massive bed with dark linen sheets. It looked like a tomb. I hauled my bags inside. I needed to isolate. I needed to peel off my clothes and stand under scalding water until my skin turned raw and pink, just to prove to my brain that my blood was still circulating. I reached for the heavy oak door and pushed it shut. Click. The lock engaged automatically. The sound was metallic sharp and brutally final. My lungs seized. Instantly the lavish bedroom vanished. The smell of expensive linens was replaced by the stench of rotting pine and freezing dust. I wasn't in a penthouse. I was back in the cabin. Tristan was outside turning the key, his muffled laughter bleeding through the wood. "Just cool off for a bit. Hazel, you're being irrational. I'll be back tomorrow," I gasped, dropping to my knees. My hand slammed against the smooth oak of the bedroom door. I clawed at the wood, my breath coming in short. Tearing rags. I couldn't find the latch. The room was spinning. The air was turning to ice in my throat. I was going to die here. Again. He was going to let me die. "Open it." I choked out my voice. A pathetic, high-pitched scrape. "Please open the door." I beat my fists against the wood. My knuckles throbbed a dull pain that barely registered over the roaring panic in my skull. Suddenly, the door jerked inward. I fell forward, spilling onto the slate floor of the hallway. I scrambled backward like a feral animal, my spine slamming hard against the baseboard. I pulled my knees to my chest, gasping for oxygen, tears burning a hot track down my freezing cheeks. Conrad stood in the doorway. He held a small silver override key in his hand. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable. He didn't rush forward to help me up. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He just watched the way my chest heaved, the way my eyes darted wildly around the well-lit hallway, searching for a threat that wasn't there. For a long, agonizing minute, the only sound was my ragged breathing and the low hum of the central heating pushing hot air into the corridor. Conrad crouched down, slowly keeping his distance. He placed the silver key on the floor between us. The locks in this apartment are biometric, he said. His voice was low, devoid of any pity or judgment, just a statement of fact. They engage automatically. I am going to disable the lock on your door. It will not close completely unless you force it. I stared at the key, then up at his face. My throat was too tight to speak. I gave a single jerky nod. He stood up. He walked to the edge of the door, pulled a small pocket knife from his trousers, and jammed it into the strike plate, bending the metal just enough so the latch couldn't catch. He tested it. The door swung shut, hit the frame, and bounced open an inch. Leave the lights on, Conrad said, turning his back to me and walking towards the kitchen. I am making tea. He didn't ask about Tristan. He didn't ask about my panic. He just broke his own perfect cage so I could breathe inside it. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum, feeling the frantic, galloping rhythm of my heart slowly begin to settle. Tuesday morning smelled like exhaust fumes and damp concrete. I stepped out of my town car in the underground parking garage of Vanguard Holdings. The air was heavy, tasting metallic and stale. I wore a tailored crimson coat today, a stark contrast to the muted colors I usually hid in. My heels clicked a steady, rhythmic tempo against the pavement. I was a Vanguard shareholder now, Conrad's wife. The legal paperwork had been expedited with a ruthless efficiency that only billion-dollar retainers could buy. Hazel, the voice echoed off the concrete pillars, scraping against my spine like a rusty nail. I stopped. The driver had already pulled away. The garage was mostly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing a low, angry drone overhead. Tristan stepped out from behind a concrete column. He looked terrible. His usually perfectly coiffed hair was unkempt, falling over his forehead in greasy strands. His tie was loosened, the collar of his shirt wrinkled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. He looked exactly the way I felt during my last hours on Earth. Tristan, I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how hollow I felt looking at him. The sheer terror of the cabin was gone, replaced by a cold, settling disgust. He closed the distance between us fast, his expensive leather shoes echoing sharply. What the hell game are you playing? He demanded, stopping 2 feet away. He smelled of stale whiskey and sour sweat. I've been locked out of my accounts. The board refused my calls. My mother is having a nervous breakdown. It isn't a game. It's a consequence. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder, looking at him with absolute indifference. You stole from the company. Conrad acted. Conrad acted because you poisoned him. Tristan lunged forward, grabbing my upper arm. His fingers dug into my coat, hard and desperate. You made up some insane story. I didn't scream. I didn't pull away. I simply looked down at his hand, then back up to his bloodshot eyes. Let go of me, I said, my tone flat. Dangerous, or what? He sneered, his breath hot against my face. You'll call your new husband. You think he cares about you. He's using you for the shares. Hazel, you're a pawn. Once he consolidates power, he'll discard you like garbage. You belong with me. You're mine. The sheer, blinding audacity of his entitlement hit me like a physical blow. In my past life, this was the moment I would have cried. I would have begged him to love me, begged him to explain why Sophie was better. I would have let him drag me back into his web of manipulation. Instead, a laugh bubbled up from my throat. It was a dark, jagged sound that echoed in the empty garage. Tristan's grip faltered. He looked at me as if I had lost my mind. I belong to no one, I said, stepping forward, forcing him to step back. But Vanguard belongs to Conrad, which means, by extension, my family's shares dictate your future. You are bankrupt. Tristan, you have nothing. I'll expose you, he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. I'll tell the press you're a lunatic. I'll tell them this marriage is a sham. Do it, I challenged. Leaning in, I could see the burst capillaries in his eyes. Go to the press. Tell them you were embezzling millions to buy diamonds for your mistress while your fiancé discovered the fraud. Let's see how the market reacts to your name. Let's see if you can ever secure a job in this city again without the Vanguard umbrella." He swallowed hard. The Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. The reality of his situation was finally sinking through his thick skull. "Hazel, please." The threat vanished, instantly replaced by the pathetic whine of a cornered dog. "Sophie meant nothing. It was a stupid mistake. You can fix this. Talk to Uncle Conrad. Please, I'll do anything." I stared at him. This was the man who had let me freeze to death. This sniveling weak creature in a wrinkled suit. Conrad was very clear at dinner. I said softly, my voice carrying perfectly in the quiet garage. "He gave you an instruction." Tristan blinked confused. "What?" "The next time you see me," I reminded him, my eyes locking onto his. "You lower your head." Tristan's face went rigid. A dull flush of humiliation crept up his neck, turning his skin a mottled red. His jaw clenched, so hard I thought his teeth might crack. He stared at me, warring with his pride, his desperation, and the cold, hard fact that I held the keys to his survival. Slowly, agonizingly, Tristan bowed his head. He looked at the dirty concrete near my boots. I watched his submission. I waited to feel the rush of victory. I waited to feel healed. I felt absolutely nothing. I turned my back on him and walked toward the private elevator. I didn't look back. The satisfying click of my heels drowned out the sound of his ragged breathing. Sleep remained a foreign concept. It was 3:00 a.m. The penthouse was tomb quiet, save for the low, vibrating hum of the commercial refrigerator in the kitchen. I padded barefoot across the cold slate, wearing an oversized gray t-shirt and loose sweatpants. My mind was racing, replaying the scene in the parking garage over and over. Breaking Tristan hadn't fixed me. It had just left a massive, echoing void where my fear used to live. I turned the corner into the main living area and stopped. The room was dark except for the amber glow of a desk lamp in the open study. Conrad was awake. He sat in a high-backed leather chair, a pair of reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, reviewing a thick stack of contracts. He wore a simple black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, without the armor of his tailored suits. He looked larger, broader, more human. I stood in the shadows, watching him. He didn't miss a beat. Without looking up from the paper, he spoke. "There is warm milk on the stove and a bottle of scotch on the counter. Choose your poison." I stepped into the dim light of the study. "Do you ever sleep?" "Occasionally, when my assets aren't in flux." He signed the bottom of a document with a heavy stroke of his pen and finally looked up. He took his glasses off, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Tristan came to the Vanguard garage today. Security footage caught the interaction." I stiffened. I wrapped my arms around my waist, suddenly hyper-aware of how thin my shirt was. "Are you angry I didn't call security?" "I'm curious why you didn't." Conrad replied, leaning back in his chair. The leather creaked. "You confronted a desperate man alone in an empty parking structure. That was a tactical error. Desperate men do not fight fair. I needed him to know I wasn't afraid of him anymore. And are you?" I looked at the floor. The slate tiles were freezing against the arches of my feet. "No, I'm not afraid of him. I'm afraid of what he made me." Conrad didn't offer a platitude. He didn't tell me I was strong or brave. He just stared at me, his dark eyes analyzing the data I was giving him. He stood up towering in the dimly lit room. He walked past me into the kitchen. I heard the clink of glass, the heavy glug of liquid. He returned a moment later and handed me a heavy crystal tumbler, 2 fingers of amber scotch. "No ice. Drink," he ordered. I took a sip. It burned like battery acid going down my throat, but it instantly settled the knot in my stomach. A heavy dark warmth spread through my chest. Conrad leaned against the edge of his mahogany desk, crossing his arms. "At dinner, you told my sister-in-law that you were no longer overwhelmed by the linens. You told her you were looking at the logistics. In my office, you looked like someone who had survived a house fire." My breath hitched. I took another sip of the scotch, staring at the amber liquid. People who survive fires. Conrad continued, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly register that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Do not typically walk toward the arsonist. They run. Yet you chose to bind yourself to my family. You chose to live in my house. Why? I told you. It's the safest place. Safety is a myth sold to the middle class. Conrad said flatly, you wanted proximity. You wanted a front row seat to his destruction. You are a very angry woman. Hazel. I looked up at him. The scotch was loosening the tight, frantic grip I kept on my emotions. The cynical armor I had worn all day started to crack. Is that a problem for you? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. No. Conrad uncrossed his arms. He reached out his large, calloused hand hovering in the air for a fraction of a second before his knuckles lightly brushed against my cheek. The contact was electric. It was the softest touch I had ever felt from a man who made a living destroying people. Anger is useful. It keeps you warm, but it also blinds you. I froze, leaning into his touch entirely by instinct. He didn't pull away. You broke the lock on my door. I whispered, the non sequitur slipping out before I could stop it. You couldn't breathe. He replied simply, you didn't ask why. I don't care why. Conrad dropped his hand, stepping back, instantly rebuilding the invisible wall between us. The brief moment of warmth vanished, leaving the air between us charged and heavy. Your past trauma is your own to manage. My only concern is that you function. Do not let your vendetta compromise Vanguard, and do not let my nephew corner you in a garage again. Next time, break his jaw. He turned back to his desk, picking up his reading glasses. The conversation was over. I stood there for a moment, gripping the scotch glass. He was cold, calculated, and completely detached. He was exactly what I bargained for. But as I turned and walked back toward the east wing, I noticed something. The digital thermostat on the wall glowed a soft blue, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. He was still keeping the penthouse uncomfortably hot. For me, sunlight hit the Vanguard lobby in sharp geometric slabs. It was a Thursday 3 weeks into my marriage. The initial shockwave had passed, leaving behind a sterile, tense reality. Tristan was gone exiled to a minor subsidiary branch in Ohio, his accounts bleeding dry under the weight of forensic accountants. He was a ghost in this building, but ghosts have a funny way of leaving a stench behind. I was sitting in the ground floor atrium, a glass of mineral water sweating onto the marble table in front of me. I had just finished signing over the last of my grandfather's voting rights to Conrad's proxy. The leather portfolio was still open on the table. Hazel. The voice was high, breathy, and laced with a manufactured fragility. I didn't flinch. I slowly capped my pen, the click sounding unnaturally loud over the low hum of the atrium's water feature. I looked up. Sophie stood across the table. She was wearing a beige trench coat belted tightly around her waist, her blonde hair falling in perfect tragic waves. She looked like a woman auditioning for the role of a grieving widow, but the smell gave her away. She was drowning in the jasmine perfume Tristan used to buy her. It smelled cloying, desperate, like flowers left in a vase 3 days too long. You're trespassing. Sophie, I said. My voice was a flat line. Security usually flags non-employees at the turnstiles. I waited for someone to scan in and walked behind them. She admitted, her lower lip trembling. She clutched a designer handbag, one I recognized from a bank statement, to her chest. I had to see you. Tristan isn't answering my calls. He's gone. He left me with the lease on the apartment. Hazel, I can't afford it. I stared at her. The sheer, breathtaking narcissism of the plea paralyzed me for a fraction of a second. She was the woman who had slept in the bed I picked out. She was the woman laughing in the hotel room while the skin on my hands split from the frostbite at the cabin door. I don't care, I said simply. Sophie blinked a genuine crack in her porcelain mask. Excuse me, I don't care about your lease. I don't care about your phone calls. I leaned back in the heavy leather chair, crossing my legs. You are a parasite who attached herself to a dying host. The host is dead. Go find another one. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over her carefully applied eyeliner. How can you be so cruel? You won. You have Vanguard. You have Conrad. You completely destroyed, you ruined our lives over a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. I corrected, my voice dropping an octave. A mistake is dropping glass. A mistake is taking the wrong exit on the freeway. My fiancé for 6 months and letting him embezzle money to buy your silence is a full-time job. You just got fired. Her face flushed and ugly, blotchy red. The sad girl act dissolved, replaced by a vicious sneer that pulled at the corners of her mouth. She slammed her hands down on the marble table. The water glass violently rattled. You think you're so smart, she hissed, leaning over the portfolio. The sickening smell of jasmine washed over me, making my stomach pitch. You think Conrad actually wants you. You're a freak, Hazel. Tristan told me how you are. You wake up screaming. You stare at the walls like a psycho. Conrad is going to get sick of playing nursemaid to a broken toy, and when he dumps you, you'll have nothing. My lungs tightened. The air in the atrium suddenly felt thin cold. The phantom snow pressed against the back of my neck. I squeezed my hands into fists under the table, my nails biting into my palms, grounding myself in the sharp, immediate pain. Don't flinch. When the fire starts, you stand in it. I didn't get a chance to reply. A shadow fell over the table, entirely blocking the sunlight. My wife is not a toy. A voice rumbled. Sophie, gasped, recoiling so fast she stumbled over her own heels. Conrad stood behind my chair. He wore a 3-piece suit the color of wet slate. The jacket unbuttoned, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. But there was nothing casual about his eyes. They were fixed on Sophie with a look of absolute, terrifying, predatory focus. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sheer mass of his presence sucked the oxygen out of the space. Mr. Vanguard. Sophie stammered, her hand shaking. Conrad didn't look at her. He looked down at me. Are you finished here? Hazel. Yes, I said. My voice was steady, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Conrad finally turned his gaze back to Sophie. He observed her for 3 agonizing seconds, letting her squirm under the weight of his silence. You have exactly 30 seconds to vacate this building before I have security physically throw you through the revolving doors. Conrad said softly, if you ever approach my wife again, I will not freeze your bank accounts. I will ensure you cannot open one in this hemisphere. Run along. Sophie didn't say a word. She turned on her heel and practically sprinted toward the exit, her trench coat flapping behind her. I let out a long, shaky breath, uncurling my bleeding palms. I stared at the sweat pooling at the base of my water glass. You didn't have to do that. You were handling it. Conrad agreed, pulling out the chair opposite me and sitting down. The leather groaned under his weight, but the smell of her perfume was giving me a migraine from 20 feet away. A short, bruised laugh escaped my throat. I looked up at him. Tristan told her I wake up screaming. Conrad's expression didn't change. He reached across the table, his large fingers tapping once against the leather portfolio. Tristan is an idiot who confuses trauma with weakness. You survived whatever it is that makes you scream. That makes you dangerous, not broken. He stood up, tapping the table one last time. We have a gala tonight. Charity Foundation. Wear something that doesn't look like armor. I'll meet you at the car at 7:00. He walked away, his heavy footsteps fading into the hum of the lobby. I sat alone at the marble table, realizing the phantom chill in my bones had vanished entirely, replaced by the lingering heat of his proximity. The invitations were printed on frosted acrylic embossed with silver foil. The Vanguard Foundation Winter Gala. When I saw the card sitting on the granite kitchen counter, I had to grip the edge of the island to keep my knees from buckling. A winter gala. Ice. Snow. Freezing air. The universe had a remarkably sick sense of humor. By 8:00 p.m., We were standing in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. It was a sensory nightmare. The event planners had transformed the space into an Arctic tundra. Crystal chandeliers had been swapped for massive jagged ice sculptures. Blue and white uplighting washed the room in an eerie glacial glow to keep the ice from melting. The air conditioning was cranked to a brutal, biting 55 degrees. I was wearing a floor-length slip dress made of heavy liquid silver silk. It offered absolutely no protection against the cold. As soon as we stepped through the double doors, the chill hit me. It wasn't just a physical sensation. It was a psychological trigger. My breath immediately shortened. The smell of the room, cut freesia, and the sterile metallic tang of cold air was exactly the smell of the cabin the moment the generator died. Conrad handed his overcoat to the coat check. He turned to me, offering his arm. I placed my hand on his sleeve. My fingers were already turning to ice. Through the thick wool of his suit, I could feel the solid, radiant heat of his arm. I gripped it tighter than I should have. "Smile," Conrad murmured, leaning down so his mouth was close to my ear. "The board is watching. 10 minutes of handshakes. Then you can sit." "I'm fine," I lied. My teeth were practically vibrating. We waded into the crowd. Faces blurred. Sycophants. Politicians. Board members. I nodded. I smiled. I let Conrad do the talking. His voice was a low, steady rumble that anchored me to the present. But the ice sculptures towering over the buffet tables were dragging me back. Water dripped from the carved swan, splashing onto the linen tablecloths. Drip, drip, drip. "Tristan, please. I can't feel my hands." The memory echoed in my skull, loud and violent. My vision tunneled. The blue lights morphed into the blue tinge of my own dying skin. The chatter of the ballroom sounded like the wind howling through the cracks in the cabin walls. "Hazel!" Conrad's voice broke through the static. I blinked, realizing I had stopped walking. We were standing near a towering sculpture of an oak tree, the ice groaning slightly as it shifted under its own weight. "You're gray," Conrad said. He didn't care who was watching. He stepped fully in front of me, blocking the view of the room. He reached out and wrapped his large, warm hands over my bare shoulders. "Look at me." I tried, but my chin was trembling violently. The cold was inside my chest now, wrapping around my heart, squeezing the life out of it. I can't be in here." I gasped the words, breaking apart in the frigid air. "It's too cold. Conrad, it's too cold." I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was looking at the snow. I was looking at the lock on the cabin door. Suddenly, the biting cold on my shoulders vanished, replaced by a heavy, suffocating heat. Conrad had stripped off his suit jacket and draped it over me. The silk lining still held the warmth of his body. It smelled intensely of cedar, dry ink, and espresso. He didn't pull me to a chair. He didn't offer a platitude. He wrapped his arm around my waist, his grip ironclad, and physically turned me away from the ice. "Walk," he commanded softly. He marched me out of the ballroom past the staring waitstaff, past the bewildered coat check attendant, and straight out the side exit into the humid, muggy night air of the city alleyway. The heat of the summer night hit me like a physical blow. The sudden shift in temperature shocked my system. I stumbled, my knees finally giving out. Conrad caught me. He went down on one knee onto the dirty, wet asphalt of the alley, pulling me with him. He kept his arms wrapped tight around my shoulders, pressing my face into the crook of his neck. "Breathe," he ordered. I couldn't. The panic was a living thing thrashing in my throat. I sobbed a dry, ugly, tearing sound. I grabbed the fabric of his shirt, twisting it into my fists, pressing myself into his chest like I was trying to climb inside his ribs to escape the cold. I died. I choked out the hysteria, breaking the dam of my sanity. The secret I had kept locked away bled out of me into the dark alley. He left me in the snow. He locked the door, and he let me freeze to death. I died. Conrad, I died there. It sounded like the ravings of a lunatic. I knew it did, but I couldn't stop saying it. Conrad didn't call me crazy. He didn't tell me I was having a nightmare. He didn't pull away. Instead, he tightened his grip. One of his large hands moved to the back of my head, his fingers tangling in my hair, pressing my face harder against his pulse. The other arm wrapped completely around my torso, crushing me against his massive frame. He was a furnace in the dark. "You are not dead," Conrad said. His voice was a violent, vibrating growl against my ear. "You are in my arms. You are breathing my air. Do you feel me? I'm cold." I wept, shaking uncontrollably. "I'm so cold. I have you," he said. The ruthless billionaire, the monster of the boardroom, was sitting on wet, garbage-stained concrete, holding me like I was the only thing keeping the earth on its axis. "I am right here. Hazel, burn me. Take the heat. I am right here." We stayed there for what felt like hours. I drained the warmth from his body, my tears soaking the collar of his expensive shirt. Slowly, agonizingly, the phantom frostbite receded. The smell of the alley exhaust, rain, and hot trash overpowered the memory of the freezer. When the shaking finally subsided to a dull tremor, I pulled my face away from his neck. His suit jacket was still draped over my shoulders. Conrad looked down at me. His eyes were completely dark, the slate gray swallowed by dilated pupils. He looked at my tear-streaked face, my ruined makeup, my trembling lips. He raised a hand, his thumb gently wiping a tear from my cheekbone. The roughness of his callous skin was the most beautiful thing I had ever felt. "Who locked the door?" Conrad asked. The question was quiet, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. I looked into his eyes. I saw the absolute, terrifying violence resting just beneath the surface of his control. He wasn't asking to comfort me. He was asking for a target. "Tristan," I whispered. Conrad didn't blink. The muscle in his jaw feathered once. He stood up, pulling me up with him effortlessly. He kept his jacket tight around my shoulders. "The car is waiting," he said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "We're going home." He didn't ask me to explain the impossible timeline. He didn't ask how I could have frozen to death when Tristan was currently sitting in Ohio. He just cataloged the name. The penthouse was exactly 80 degrees Fahrenheit when we stepped out of the private elevator. I dropped Conrad's suit jacket on the slate floor of the foyer. My silver dress clung to my damp skin. I felt hollowed out, exhausted, and strangely light. The secret was out. The madness that had been festering in my brain for 3 weeks was now shared space. Conrad walked past me toward the kitchen. He didn't offer me scotch this time. He poured 2 glasses of room-temperature water and brought them into the living room. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the city grid. The glass was warm against my forehead. "Drink," he said, handing me the glass. I took it, sipping the water. "You think I'm insane. I think. Human. The brain is a complex machine that processes severe trauma in ways medical science cannot fully map." Conrad replied smoothly, leaning against the glass next to me. He was still in his unbuttoned dress shirt. The collar ruined the fabric, wrinkled where I had crushed it in my fists. "I think you believe what you told me. That is all that matters." I turned to look at him. He didn't just cheat on me. Conrad, he was supposed to be my partner. He was supposed to protect me. "Tristan is a coward," Conrad stated. "Cowards do not protect. They survive at the expense of others. You expected a wolf to act like a guard dog. That was your error. And what are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The water glass felt heavy in my hand. Conrad looked down at me. The city lights cast harsh, angular shadows across the sharp planes of his face. He didn't look like a savior. He looked exactly like the ruthless predator the world knew him to be. "I am the man who owns the cage he is locked in," Conrad said slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen a few times, navigating to an email, and handed the device to me. I took it, squinting at the bright screen. It was a dossier, bank records, offshore transfer receipts, and a series of photographs. The photos were grainy, taken from a distance. They showed Tristan sitting in a dingy diner in Ohio, handing an envelope to a man in a leather jacket. "What is this?" I asked, my brow furrowing. Before Tristan left for Ohio, he attempted to liquidate a trust fund belonging to his mother to cover his debts. Conrad explained, his tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "The man in the photo is a private auditor he hired to doctor the transfer documents. It is a federal offense. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." I stared at the screen. The evidence was irrefutable. It was 1,000,000 times worse than the corporate funds he stole for Sophie. He was robbing his own mother to save his skin. "You knew he was doing this," I said, looking up from the phone. "I set up the account he stole from. I left the door unlocked to see if he would walk through it. He did." Conrad took the phone back, slipping it into his pocket. I was prepared to handle it internally. Keep the Vanguard name out of the press. Let him rot in a cubicle in the Midwest until he learned his lesson. Conrad stepped closer to me. The heat radiating off his body enveloped me, pushing back the cold glass of the window behind my back. But then, Conrad murmured, his voice dropping into that dark, gravelly register that made my spine tingle. "You told me he locked a door and let you freeze in the dark." My breath hitched. "Conrad, the FBI received the dossier 10 minutes ago," Conrad said. The absolute finality in his voice was terrifying. "The local authorities in Ohio have already been dispatched to his apartment. He will be arrested before dawn because it involves interstate fraud and a federal trust. He will not be granted bail. He will be placed in federal holding." My mouth fell open. You destroyed him. Completely." "No," Conrad corrected, reaching out. His large hand cupped my jaw. His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone. The touch infinitely gentle, a stark contrast to the violence of his words. "You destroyed him. Hazel, you gave me the match. I just threw it into the gasoline." I stared into his dark slate eyes. The revenge was complete. The ruined, terrified boy who had groveled in the parking garage was now going to spend the next decade in a concrete box. He would never wear a tailored suit again. He would never smell like bergamot and expensive gin. He was erased. I waited for the satisfaction. I waited for the closure. It didn't come. What came instead was a sudden, overwhelming awareness of the man standing in front of me. The man who had broken the locks on my bedroom door. The man who had cranked the thermostat to 80 degrees. The man who had sat on wet asphalt in a dirty alleyway and let me soak his shirt with my tears. I didn't marry a shield. I married a monster. But the monster was looking at me like I was the only thing in the world worth protecting. "What happens now?" I asked, leaning slightly into the warmth of his palm. Conrad's eyes dropped to my lips. For a fraction of a second, the iron control slipped. I saw the raw, burning hunger beneath the ice. "Now," Conrad whispered, his thumb pressing gently against my lower lip. "You stop running. You belong to me. You are my wife, and I do not share what is mine." He didn't ask for permission. He didn't hesitate. Conrad lowered his head and kissed me. It wasn't a gentle testing kiss. It was absolute possession. His mouth was hot, demanding, tasting of scotch and dark bitter espresso. His arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against his hard chest, lifting me slightly onto my toes. The kiss was a physical brand, searing away the last lingering traces of phantom snow. My hands came up, grabbing fistfuls of his ruined shirt, holding on to him like he was gravity. The cold was gone. Tristan was gone. The past life was ash. I kissed him back, pouring all my anger, all my broken edges, and all my desperate need for heat into the contact. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathing heavily. Conrad rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling against mine. "The East Wing is yours," Conrad murmured, his voice rough. "But if you walk into my bedroom tonight, I will lock the door, and I will not let you out." A shiver ran down my spine. But this time it had absolutely nothing to do with the cold. I looked at my husband, the ruthless uncle, the architect of my ruin and my salvation. I don't need the East Wing, I said. Conrad opened his eyes. The dark slate was on fire. He didn't say another word. He swept me up into his arms, carrying me away from the cold glass windows and deep into the burning heat of the West Wing. I didn't just survive the winter. I married the fire. Tristan is rotting in a federal cell, and I am the undisputed Queen of Vanguard. The cold will never touch me again. If you loved my journey from a betrayed, broken fiancé to a ruthless billionaire's fiercely protected wife, hit that like button. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the absolute best revenge is a spectacular, unapologetic rise. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more dark, triumphant stories. And drop A in the comments if you think Tristan got exactly what he deserved. Stay ruthless, and thanks for listening.